All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Payton. I am a current LLM animal law student at Lewis & Clark. Today I'm going to be sharing my paper. It's called Second Chances for Both Ends of the Leash, a Humane Approach to Juvenile Rehabilitation. It is something that sits very near and dear to my heart. It does sit at the intersection of animal law and juvenile justice. And the ideas that I'm going to talk about today, in my opinion, they're very simple, they're very high level. But after kind of starting to implement it and seeing it firsthand, I'm seeing just how powerful it can be to both of these populations who are usually underserved. So we can just jump into it. So we do have to talk about the overarching problem. In 2024, more than 300,000 dogs were euthanized in U.S. shelters. Meanwhile, about 1.7 million juveniles are arrested every single year, and about half of them will reoffend before they turn to the age of 25. So I think the biggest problem is that shelter dogs and justice-involved youth are two groups that society often feels okay to turn a blind eye to. A lot of times they're viewed as voiceless populations. But like I said before, after working in criminal defense, juvenile delinquency specifically, and in my rescue work, I'm seeing how powerful it can be when we bring them together to kind of force that change to happen. And they just really need somebody to give them that chance. And like I said, when we turn a blind eye to them all the time, it's really hard for them to have that chance to really make the changes that they should. So when I started Compassionate Canine Society, it really got me thinking, what if instead of relying on society to make these changes for them, what if they come together and just help each other heal? So why are we talking about empathy? There's so many other skills out there that are very, very important. What I will say is that, and a lot of people don't know this, is that we are not born with empathy. We do have the capacity for it. It can be learned and it can be strengthened over time, but none of us are automatically born with empathy. So it's very, very important that we do teach it. So psychologists talk about two different kinds of empathy. There's affective empathy, which is basically feeling somebody else's emotions. And then there's cognitive empathy, which is more understanding their perspectives. So both of these do matter when we're talking about harm and the capacity to be rehabilitated. But this is especially true during adolescence, so any time before you turn the age of 25, because that's when your brain is still developing. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is if we aren't teaching empathy to our youth, they do grow up with antisocial tendencies, and studies are also showing that they grow up with violent tendencies. And so obviously this is us trying to curb it in a way. And that's also not to say that once you turn 25 or older that you're not possible of gaining empathy. It's definitely still able to be learned over time. But obviously hitting you in that juvenile age is kind of the most effective. It's kind of like with learning a new language. You're more susceptible to it at a younger age than trying to learn it when you're like 35. So that's kind of where we're coming from when we're targeting this generation. I do think we also have to talk about trauma and just juvenile justice in general. When we see most of the youth in the justice system, they have already experienced some sort of trauma, or they are currently experiencing the trauma within the justice system. You've probably heard of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Very, very common. There's lots of resources out there. But it's essentially things like abuse, neglect, household instability. And all of these experiences, they disrupt empathy. And so what we're now seeing is you have a lack of empathy combined with different trauma responses from these things that you've dealt with in your childhood. And together, it makes reoffending so much more likely unless we're able to address the underlying issue. I won't get into race too much today. I feel like it's a whole other tangent and we just don't really have the time for it today. But I do need to at least throw it out there and recognize that Black and Hispanic youth are far more likely to be arrested and detained, even when they exhibit the exact same behaviors as their white peers. So yes, at the end of the day, I'm here to talk about individual behavior and what we can do to kind of curb those behaviors. But we also have to recognize the systemic inequalities that face this generation. Moving on to the current system gaps that we're seeing. The interventions that we most often use don't actually fix the root of the problem. A lot of times they don't even touch on the root of the problem. Detention compounds trauma, and it's actually been shown to increase recidivism when it's not paired with a proper rehabilitation tool. Diversion programs are definitely much better, but the problem is that a lot of them, not all, they tend to focus on compliance. So it's a whole lot of follow these rules, check these boxes, get a certificate, move on with your life, we're done. So then what we end up with is young people who know exactly what not to do because they just got in trouble for it, but they have no idea why they acted out in the first place or kind of how they can respond differently the next time. And this is especially true in the heat of passion kind of cases, because when you're angry or when you're scared, you react in a way that probably a rational mind wouldn't. And so just because you got slapped on the wrist for doing it this time, if we're not fixing those problems and teaching you how to react differently next time, you're going to end up right back in the same place. So this is where animals come in. Animal-assisted programs are not new. I'm not going to stand up here and say that this is a brand new idea that I came up with. It's not. They exist in many different prisons and schools. And in every single program, the results have been very, very impressive. We see participants reporting having reduced stress, increased trust, and stronger social behaviors. Now, the two programs that I researched specifically for my paper were Positive Change and Puppies Behind Bars, and those two programs specifically showed us that caring for animals can reshape how people see themselves and others, and not only that, but how they treat themselves and others, which is obviously very, very important. Now, what I'm proposing and what I would like to see personally is just a shift in the timeline. And so I want to target youth before they get to prison, but I also want to wait until they're in a mental state where they can kind of really understand the power of their actions, and they can really develop and practice empathy in more meaningful ways. Now, again, I love these programs that already exist. I think they're very much necessary. But I also believe that a first-time offender or somebody who's been showing escalation is really in that sweet spot. It's not during school where it might feel like, extracurricular activity or maybe like a meaningless part of your day. But it's also not in prison where you're stuck there for X amount of years. And so I think when we're targeting this population where, you've made a mistake and you have to take accountability for it, but you're also open to learning and growing and just genuine change before getting slapped with a prison sentence, in my opinion, I just think that this is a really crucial point for them to make a meaningful change in their life. Now, I, too, am not very good at science, so I'm not going to stand up here and pretend to be a scientist, but I can research, and scientists say that when you interact with animals, oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, it goes up, and cortisol, which is the stress hormone, it goes down. So now we're seeing a physiological shift towards openness and trust, which is exactly what we're looking for when we're teaching empathy. Another key note is that for many youth, the dog in front of them is really the first being that they've ever trusted, and vice versa, who has ever trusted them. And so that's a really meaningful point. And that moment of connection is really the entry point for change. And so another thing that I do want to emphasize with this is that just because the human-animal connection is the basis for teaching empathy, the empathy gains are supposed to be much more general. And so we don't want them just being empathetic towards animals moving forward. We want them to be empathetic towards other humans, towards all animals, not just dogs, and towards themselves, of course. And all of this brings me to Empathy for Animals. It is a course that I developed with Compassionate Canine Society. It's a canine-assisted diversion program for youth in the justice system. I think our main target, especially right now, is kind of just the behavioral issues, the violent offenses, and escalation in crime. I feel like they're really more in the mindset of moving forward with things rather than just more simpler crimes or that don't involve violence. The program pairs young people with rescue dogs that we have pulled from all over the country, from euthanasia lists, and together they're able to kind of rebuild and heal together. As for the program structure, in my paper I wrote about our 6-week program, which we do still run. However, we're only 2 people, and so in person it's a little bit more difficult to have a big reach like we would like. So I'm going to go through the 8-week version, and basically these are all the things that we go through. In week 1, they learn the basics of trauma, stress, and just the importance of mental health and kind of what is empathy. A lot of people relate sympathy with empathy, and they're not the same thing. So just kind of making sure that everybody understands the differences. In weeks 2, 3, 4, and 5, they get to meet real rescue dogs and learn those stories. I won't go through all of the weeks, but for week 2 specifically, Nina is a very special dog to our rescue. She was bred and rebred many, many times. When she turned 5 years of age, they dropped her off at a shelter, as most breeders do. She was there for a couple of months, which in San Bernardino is not very common. They usually euthanize dogs after about 2 weeks. So she got a longer stay there, but then she got redlined, and so our rescue stepped in a couple of hours before the deadline. Now, after we had her, she stayed with us for about 2 months, and then in May of this year, she did get adopted, and then we found out that the adopters were allergic to her. Both of them were. That's ironic. But anyways, they brought her back to us, and so when she came back, her mental state was definitely not good. She was definitely showing signs of trauma responses. And so when we're interacting with her, she's no longer friendly with other dogs, which had never been a problem in the past. It was just because she was so amped up and so anxious over things. She was definitely a lot more anxious towards us. She was starting to nipping at our hands and other behaviors that are not adoptable behaviors. And so we kind of took that time to readjust with her and really train her. We already had this program in the works, and so we wanted to train her to be a facility dog. She's done amazing with this, and she's already gotten to meet a couple kids, so we're very grateful with that. But with all that being said, Nina's story is one that a lot of these kids also have. They have been neglected, or maybe they've been looked over a lot of times in their past. And so it's really special for them to be able to now see her story, how she was treated, how she overcame all of those trauma responses, and how they can too. So with that being said, the rest of the dogs that also are introduced in this relate back to cycles of harm, perspective taking, and emotional literacy. In week 6, the main focus is accountability and repair. So we do have themselves put themselves in their victim shoes in a journaling prompt. And then we also have them write an accountability letter, which is very, very important. We hope that they write the letter towards the victim of their crime, but any person that they've hurt is obviously acceptable. Week 7 is all about rewriting their story and leading into growth mindsets. We want to see them self-forgive. We want to see them with that more forward movement. A lot of the previous weeks have all been about, what kind of person was I in the past? What can I do differently moving forward? So now week 7, we really want to see what are you going to do from today on to be a better person. Week 8 is more about an overview of everything that we learned and just talking about what empathy looks like for each of them individually, because everybody has their own story and they're going to walk forward with empathy in different ways. Obviously, we have to talk about safety when we're talking about animal-assisted settings. So all of our dogs are temperament tested, vaccinated, and supervised by handlers, and then youth are screened for eligibility, attitudes, and openness towards the dogs. The one other thing that I will mention with this is that the person handling the dog has no other job. So the person handling the dog isn't also speaking to the group of kids. Their only job is to make sure that the dog is safe and that the child is safe and no negative interactions take place. Concerns, I think the number one concern is safety. I would answer that yes, this is a safe program. There's many strict protocols in place. Plus, animal-assisted education is nothing new. I'm not having to reinvent the wheel here. And so other programs have kind of showed us what works and where the risks lie, and we move forward based on that. The other thing that I do love is that when we're doing a virtual program, we don't have to worry about safety. Obviously, in person is much preferred because you can kind of interact and build that bond a little bit quicker. But I love the fact that even if we don't have a dog who's maybe temperament tested to go out into a facility, maybe they're still going through their own traumas and trying to overcome that, they can still be introduced to these kids, and these kids have more of an opportunity to connect with different beings, because maybe Nina isn't the dog for everybody, but maybe Jamal is a better fit, or maybe Winnie is a better fit. And so I love the fact that with an online program, we don't have to worry about safety, and it's a little bit more all-inclusive. The next one, is it affordable? Detention costs about $588 per day per youth, which is obviously very, very expensive. Programs like ours are very affordable. Most of these programs cost anywhere from like $1 to $120, which really comes out to about $10 to $15 per week. So I would definitely say it is affordable. And then, does empathy last? Research has definitely shown that it does. Other animal-assisted programs have shown a drop in recidivism with their clients, so we're hopeful to follow suit. And then just moving on to the broader implications. This program is designed for juvenile diversion, but its potential reach is definitely much broader. With just a couple of tweaks, it's very possible for us to adapt it into schools and foster care systems and just other general community facilities. I'm thinking like churches, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs. But pretty much anybody who wants to foster empathy in this next generation, we're all for it. We want that. And then I think this goes without saying, but the benefits are definitely twofold. The youth are benefiting because they are kind of reducing their harmful behaviors and they're building their empathy skills. And then the shelter dogs are gaining more socialization. And the other part of it is it does give them purpose to be able to work with these kids. So my closing message, one thing that I want to throw out is that this is about much more than a program to me. I think at its core, Empathy for Animals is all about embedding empathy into our culture as a whole. I personally, I don't love where we're at as a society, as a country. And so I think a big part of that is all rooted in empathy and the lack thereof. And empathy really could solve most of these bad behaviors. So like I said, the reason we started offering a super interactive online version is because we want to see this go national, maybe even international one day. But at the end of the day, it's all about having a better planet for me, for you, for the animals, for the environment in general. And so really my only goal with this is to give a second chance to two populations that I feel like are overlooked the most. And hopefully in turn, we'll start seeing more broad societal changes as well. But yeah, I definitely want to make sure that what I'm getting across is that our focus is connection and rehabilitation rather than correction and retribution. Thank you.